let me move to Scott, if I can. From your vantage point, what's the impact on manufacturers? The impact on the U.S. industrial base? Did this corporate-led NAFTA style work for all businesses?
Thank you, Rosa. And it's great to be Congresswoman
Rosa,
DeLauro.
I wasn't baptized.
I have been lucky to have my foot in all of these communities for a long time with Capitol Hill and the trade movement, and so I feel very blessed that way. So in one way, it worked very well for corporations because the shareholder value went up tremendously as they were able to practice this labor arbitrage and have these investments locked into place and not have much of a fear that they'd be removed. So it worked quite well for global wealthy companies until it didn't, and I'll get to that. It didn't work very well for the rest of us, and for companies that were committed to try to produce in the United States, they were undercut by these agreements in a number of different ways. And certainly for working people who were seeking union representations at these facilities, these trade agreements could now be used as a cudgel against them, and it eroded bargaining power that way. And the economic evidence that has been, I think, presented over the last 3 decades now, there were a lot of rosy predictions about how these trade agreements would turn out, that the kind of orthodox economic community was purporting about, like NAFTA would create all these jobs, all these companies would move their production to the United States, not from it, and then rinse and repeat for all of these other agreements, whether it was China or with Central America or the TPP. And what actually happened when you look at, when you review all the predictions that were made, the work that, for instance, the Economic Policy Institute did and other institutions was much more aligned with the reality of what we saw in manufacturing. We lost 1 out of 3 manufacturing jobs in just over a decade. And it was started by NAFTA and kind of turbocharged by the China agreement as well. And that is a swift, sudden decline. And a lot of Americans may not have seen or felt that right away, but the communities in which these workers were located are still feeling the effects and still reeling from them. And there's been follow-on research that has shown that the social and economic impacts of all of this have been incredibly devastating. And that there's higher divorce rates, there's lower connections with community, there's more deaths of despair, there's lower opportunity for wages, there's a lot of flight of young people out. And so you name it, basically, the societal ill, and we've seen it, and it's also promoted political extremism as well. And so, it has been a contributing factor to that. And so when you add all of that up, that's been obviously a good deal for a very small subset of America and a terrible deal for most manufacturing, for most workers, and all of this. And I just want to share just a little vignette. I was traveling with one of my sons across the country last summer, and we stopped in Little Rock, Arkansas. We went to the Clinton Library. And I thought it'd be kind of cool. And we're walking through it. I remember Socks the Cat. That was pretty great. And the saxophone was pretty cool. And the peace accord, there was a lot of hope with all of that, and the peace and the prosperity and all of that was great. And then we got to the little alcove on international economic policy, and I lost my shit. And I was like, oh, this is how I spent my 90s, fighting against NAFTA, and then fighting against trade promotion authority, fast track authority that had no protections for workers, and then fighting against the giveaway to China, and then the Battle of Seattle, and all of this, and then I think we did win a couple of things as well, like the multilateral agreement on investments. I think they mentioned it there as well. And my dad was like, "Dad, you're gonna get us thrown out of this place. You're like yelling really loud." And I was like, "But the point is that philosophy, unfortunately, was very baked in, to both parties, to both the Democratic and the Republican parties, and it was there for a very long time." And I'll just close with this: it was also perpetuated by corporations in a number of different ways. I mean, the members of Congress who would generally rise to become the leaders of the committees that did this were blessed by these corporations more often than not. That applies to some of the party leadership on both sides too. That applies to the presidential candidates on both sides. That applies to the advisory committees that USTR has on all of this as well. And so when you looked across the board, and obviously these corporations were funding all of this economic research, which has been debunked, about how great all of this would be. And so so there is a reckoning now, and I know that we'll get to that, but I think that it was helped to crystallize in part by the pandemic when people faced shortages and a real crisis, and there were some real life and death situations, just about how fragile and corrupt this whole system was. And I think that helped to create the space, along with this desperation and the overwhelming body of evidence, and then also the fact that, you know, you saw some in the Republican Party that picked up this issue and co-opted, I think, working class voters that way as an alarm bell, that we got to think, do, act differently than we have been.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Scott.